Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Hey, Sean. Happy Thanksgiving Eve.
Well, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving Eve to you as well. Uh, what you planning all of your what your murder birds are going to look like and everything? You got a
I
lineup?
think our murder bird's going to look like a meatloaf and a store-bought pumpkin pie. we're
Nice.
we can't travel right now with the way Tori is,
Oh
so
yeah.
we're just going to stay here, and we're too far away to bump into any family. It's too far to
Yeah.
take a
Okay.
car trip.
Yeah, we're gonna do the old green beans, uh, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, apricot cookies. You know.
Turkey.
Yeah. No. No. We'll make a pretend turkey out of our mashed potatoes.
Okay.
Uh,
But
egg rolls.
you're closer to kids' grandparents, right?
Yeah, so we're gonna have two grandparents over, so it should be interesting.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So first holiday at the new house. So, but I've always got the third floor to retreat to if needed. Uh,
Yeah.
so
That's my dad every time. He eats dinner and then he goes to the living room and like just watches YouTube. So Dad, if you're finding this video, hi, happy Thanksgiving.
so today we're going to talk about a book that we have not come back to in a long while. We're going to talk about the third deluxe edition of Berserk. So another 550 pages or so of Berserk. But before we do that, uh, just when we're running this, it should be that a Kickstarter campaign is going to be up.
Yes.
Pre-sales are going to be up for a new Living the Line book, Centralia. And this is the debut graphic novel by Miel Van de Peet. It is a hell of a book. There are samples up right now. You should take a look at it. Even if you're not interested in the Kickstarter, definitely take a look and see if your local comic store or bookstore might be interested in picking it up. Also available to order still is Eric Creek's The Exile. Pretend this says The Exile on here. These are my
not,
Dutch. These are my
not
Dutch
the
language
balling.
editions. Right, De Balling, which Eric told us is a sort of pun in Dutch because it doesn't mean the exile, but also means the fist,
Yeah.
which I think is pretty great. But this is also a very very exciting book coming from Living the Line. We've got a big pile up here. Took my sweet time getting things together, but now things are really really flying out. So
You're
this is the big time for us.
you're dropping gems like you got holes in your pockets. Just scattering
Exactly.
amazing books all over the place now. Yeah,
Yeah.
Centralia is a hell of a book. Meal is an astonishing. Well, he was like 19 when he started on that, and
Yeah, I don't even want to think about it. He was Mill was born in 1998, the same year that I graduated from high school. Uh, for some perspective on that, uh,
and he's like coming out the gate like with this Moebius like art already, but probably
yeah,
even more detailed and insane.
yeah, it's a really quite an extraordinary book and very fun as well. Which I really appreciate having something that you can just sort of experience and not get super heavy and bogged down in. Which is not to say that we're not going to get super heavy and bogged down in Berserk Volume 3 today.
We might.
We might get a little heavy. So you guys might not know that Carson and I do zero pre-pro on these videos. And unless we occasionally like text each other panels like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
You know,
On this one we have not.
no.
Definitely.
So we don't really discuss these things in advance. So occasionally, we find fairly exciting things in the conversation. Like the first time we read Berserk, where Carson spent 20 minutes talking about penises. And I was
I'm
like,
I'm I'm
great.
I'm maintaining my position that the further we move into the volume 3 and 4, which I know you haven't read volume 4 yet, I maintain my position that Berserk is best when it has strong homoerotic undercurrents between Guts and Griffith.
If
Um,
you're offended by this position or you think it totally misrepresents the book, read on.
Yeah,
Let's
like volume
get into it.
3, I think justifies everything I said in the previous two videos. Unfortunately, past volume 4, it all just gets tossed to the wind.
Oh
Um,
well, I haven't read past what we're going to be talking about today, so I'm
yeah,
very curious to see how it shakes out. But yeah, some exciting stuff to talk about today. So shall we do this thing?
we shall.
All right.
What an amazing cover. Looks exactly the same as the first two. I
Yeah,
I enjoy that consistency in these though.
you do, yeah. We haven't talked about really the design of these books. I'm not crazy about them. I mean, I kind of get it because the people who are buying them already know what they're in for. Uh, but
Oh, really? I love the design. I love this whole like I love it on the shelf, a whole bunch of them all the same, and it just looks like so dark and imposing. Like I didn't know what Berserk was. I'd heard a couple students talk about it maybe, but when I first saw these on the shelf at Barnes and Noble, I was like, well, that looks like an important book that people care about. And I picked it up and looked through it. So to me, I like it. I like the look of that.
the mottled faux leather look really reminds me of a lot of the books that Gustave Doré, illustrated, were done in the late 18th century, done in redesigns with leather covers that look similar to this. Relevant because obviously, Miura is familiar with Doré, probably just from picking up design stuff. Like if you're going to write about, you know, kings and princesses and noblemen and stuff like that. I mean, his stuff is a tremendous resource. But then through the book, he actually uses a few things that are specific to Doré engraving, uh,
Yeah.
which I thought was also fairly interesting. Miura strikes me as someone who pulls a lot of diverse influences, despite being very grounded in the time that he's coming in from a character design standpoint. He is, to me, these character designs are obviously indebted to mid to late 80s anime,
Hmm.
and yet all of the different tricks of rendering and layout choices and things like that he makes are all informed by a huge swath, a really wide ranging swath of influences.
Oh yeah, all over the place. Art historical and like all over the place from within the comics world as well. Pretty obvious to me. Um so story wise, we're picking up in the middle. Like you can see this is Casca chapter 3. This is something that's a bit strange about how they do these books is they could have just put Casca chapter 3 in the previous book and then picked up with Prepared for
Right.
Death chapter 1 in this one, but it's a good kind of reminder too that you have Guts who was sexually abused as a child,
Right.
and then you come to find out that Casca also suffered abuses, and they're kind of coming together and forming a relationship now. They had previously been antagonistic to each other,
Right.
kind of fighting for Griffith's attention. um, and now she's relaying to Guts a bit of about her history with Griffith
Right.
and how they came to meet, but also starts to reveal, and this is where I start to feel like all my kind of jokes about homoerotic undercurrents, continue to pay off more and more in the story. Is like immediately you get this scene where Griffith is running into this politician. I forget. It's been a long time. I didn't have a
Nobleman.
chance to reread it,
Yeah.
but a feudal lord. um, he became involved in a certain feudal lord disputes, and he gets involved with a wealthy influencer, and this dude is obviously a pedophile.
Right.
And so Griffith then is willing to trade like sexual favors basically to move forward with his agenda to one day take over the world or have his own kingdom.
Right. And a lot of the discussion that you and I had back and forth on the previous collected volume was whether Griffith himself is a psychopath, whether you can sort of fit his personality into, a antisocial or manipulative kind of category, or whether you should sort of consider him as part of a sort of literary tradition rather than a real world, a real world figure.
Like a
And
real world diagnosis.
yeah, and I don't think we've really, I don't think, we've had any kind of firm conclusions yet. But I do think it's interesting that even down to Griffith's design seems to be sort of telegraphing that we are to see this as a sort of heightened reality. We mentioned in the last video that Griffith's mask is actually lifted straight from a movie called The Phantom of the Paradise. And Phantom of the Paradise is a movie that was directed by Brian De Palma and written by Brian De Palma and I think Eileen Rose is her name. Anyway, it's a really interesting. I mean, it's campy. It's a drama, but it's got a sort of camp intensity to it. That even he said Griffith's horse is wearing the mask right there.
Yeah, I was trying to. There we go. I was trying to get one with him with his mask on, but
and so this movie Phantom of the Paradise, it has this hyper intense camp intensity, and I have cried watching this movie. It's a very, very intense thing, but I think most people think of it as a kind of jokey thing. It sort of sits uncomfortably between these two kinds of poles because of the intensity that it has. If that sort of makes sense. You wouldn't really call it melodrama because it doesn't fit the melodramatic categories in the kind of classic sense. But it also is not really, it's too intense and too big to be drama. It doesn't take place in the real world,
Yeah.
And I think maybe the fact that this design is loaned from that movie might kind of gives us some clues that Griffin is bigger than a real world figure, and obviously some of the fights and stuff like that.
So you don't think that he's like a narcissist sociopath using his androgynous sexuality to his benefit?
I think if Griffith was a real person, that is the conclusion I would come to. But him in the context of the story as a person with superhuman strength that also has the body of a 12-year-old, I think I can't. I'm not ready to come to a firm conclusion until I've read more, because the story itself is distorting my understanding of him as a realist figure.
Oh, see, I see him. Maybe it's because it's a little hard because I got sucked into the story. I was still skeptical about Berserk up through our reading of volume 2. It got a little more interesting to me. This is the volume where I really, really got sucked in.
Yeah, me too.
And I was intending to only read it one volume at a time, but starting in this volume, I was like, nope, I've got him. I'm gonna keep going. So I get a little mixed up about what has happened or not yet. But
okay.
To me, I see it as like, yes, there are mystical things going on in this world. And to be involved in that realm, to get power from that realm, it like in regular magic, it's going to involve some kind of sacrifice. So I do see him as the mystical character, but I see him. I think the whole story really about Guts and Griffith, and that's a big part of what all my notes in this volume are about. It's about two normal people striving to become bigger, and I think in that and that's that narcissist sociopath like egomaniacal thing that I see in like a very real world diagnosis of Griffith, is that he's willing to do anything to get to that position. And so in this scene, he's obviously going and using his androgynous sexuality to manipulate this guy. I think at other points in the series, where he's willing to delve into like black magic to get to the next step of his thing. And so some of those things, like here, he's only a kid. I don't know he has that exceptional strength yet. I think some of that might be from making deals with things he shouldn't be making deals with. There seems to be some sense of that to me, where the distinction you're making is actually, well, it's kind of both, and then he's extremely manipulative. Like right here, he uses his androgynous sexuality to get what he wants from this guy. And then Casca, who's like, looking up to him as a leader, sees him kind of diminish himself. You can see her, like, she knows what's going on and finds it to be a diminishment of sort. And then like he plays this like crazy sympathy thing with her where he's like, oh, I'm washing all the filth off of me, and he uses
Right.
he uses that to manipulate her. And this volume is so much about all of these manipulations, and that's where it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, the last volume started to introduce all the palace intrigue stuff, with the Hawks being involved in a political standpoint and things like that. And I think this one does a much better job of balancing those aspects against each other, where you'll have a big long battle and it'll be about, Guts testing himself or, finding out what someone is capable of. And then you'll get the intrigue, and then you'll get the social drama following on the intrigue. This one seems like, he is knowing how to balance these elements against each other in a really exceptional and fairly unusual way. I can't really imagine what it would be like to, read this in a serialized format, and here's a battle that lasts for 3 installments, and then the next installment is about sexual abuse, or self-mutilation.
Go on. I mean, they can go on for so long until you resolve like whatever little scenario. I mean, it can be just a scene like him, this whole thing about him taking the bath and whatever.
Right.
You could get stuck in kind of one scene for months on end as a reader, which in this, you breeze by it in a couple minutes.
I was interested in taking a look at what other things would have been. We talked a little bit about this in the first and second videos. The things that would have been his contemporary. So this particular volume covers, I believe it's like 93 to 95, 1993 to 1995. And when you get about halfway through, you start to see, I think there's some back and forth influence between him and the artist for Blade of the Immortal, who would have debuted in 93. And I don't know which direction that influence goes, but prominent cartoonists making an action-oriented comic, and you see some of the one of the things that Blade of the Immortal was really remarked on when it first came out was, the one-page death scenes. You see some of that happening here. You see some of the softness that you get that Samura takes from pencil, and you see some of that happening here with like use of tone and softening up the edges and like sort of a compositional awareness that's very different. I talked before about Gun or Battle Angel Alita being a back and forth influence as well, another contemporary comic that has a strong anime influence in the design, but also a very sophisticated, noodly approach to some of the background detail, and even things like the way that they render teeth and different types of gore with people, eyes popping out and jaws falling off and stuff like that. So I just like to sort of file that away in the back of the head here as we go through those other two artists as potential rivals or contemporaries who were also making once or twice a month installments as opposed to the normal weekly churn.
Well, for me, there's just so many influences going on. I just kind of assume he was pulling from anybody and everybody. Like, so I guess like that's a fair game to play. I just never felt tempted to play it. I guess with this, I don't know. That's the other thing is like, so for such an intensely visual book, I think all of the notes I made were story based at this point for the most part. There's a couple like goddamn, pages here and there that stand out, but for me, it was just, I felt like his character writing in here is like, if I saw a TV show that had this level of interaction between the character, I'd be really happy with it. So like we've got that, he's playing like wounded here. And I think he does well in terms of art. He does such a good job of like how shell shocked and wounded he looks here. versus like how comforting he looks here. And
Right.
that he's cycling through those intentionally to manipulate Casca. And
Right.
then very quickly, like, she comes back and makes some kind of report, like she'll come back and say, oh, well, he never says anything like that. He never says anything to anyone, nor has he. So like he's kind of manipulating Griffith, or sorry, Guts by proxy through Casca too.
Right.
He can play people against each other. And I think that's interesting, because even her like admitting here, I couldn't stand how easy you got close to Griffin, is like a manipulative thing. You know, it's reinforcing the nature of all their relationships.
Yeah,
The competition to be the right hand, basically.
it is interesting to me that you're focused on the story. I think that one of the things you can say about the art is that he has sort of settled into a more design oriented viewpoint than he had prior. When you know, like we talked a lot in the last 500 page chunk about textural awareness, how he's sort of building a texture bank and trying out
Yeah.
different types of things like that. And now he has a lot more comfort, it seems, in just employing them when they're needed. You see like those broad black marks for the trees that then taper out at the bottom. And you know, you've got a lot more use of sort of design, drawing as design element than were previously. You know, it can be the young man, the skilled young man who shows off 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But it's the slightly older, restrained artist who knows when to dial it back and, you know, have some conservatism in terms of employing their abilities.
Well, and how to integrate the things, because it
Right.
was very obvious to me in the first two volumes that he'll switch tools and use the tools to switch style. Like when he jumps to
Right.
a brush, he just I think instinctively draws very differently than when he works with a pen. So like
Right.
brush work versus pen work versus what he does with tone. So when you enter the Golden Age arc, it goes to all of this very like crosshatchy, thin contour, no spotted blacks except Casca's hair kind of thing. And then every now and then you'll burst into the scene where he gets the brush, or where you have more of the tone. Whereas
Right.
early in book one, it all looked kind of like this and this, like the
Yeah.
mixture of the brush and the tone. And that stripped away. And I was really bummed when that stripped away. And then I realized he'll come back to it intentionally. And I think in this volume, he's doing a better job of just like integrating it in, instead of saying like this whole story arc is drawn this way and this whole
Right.
story arc is drawn that way. Yeah, he's able to flip between them to
Use it as
emotive
appropriate
purpose.
for the mode.
Yeah, yeah.
And man, like that panel on the top, the one that you just had there. I mean, like just the chunky black reinforcing the hatchiness. Now the sorry, the next panel, guts at the top there.
This?
And no, on the left. Yeah. Just like the little reinforcing, you know, chunks of black. I mean, it's just that's it's just really sophisticated, you know. The
And
integration.
his cross hatching, I think some of my opposition to how he used cross hatching was the crap reproduction in volume one,
Yes,
because
I
it made
agree.
it look very patchy. But
Right.
he still does that weird hashtag thing when people
Uh-huh.
get dirty. But I feel like his cross hatching is getting more palatable to my eye. Like
Yeah.
it's integrated better, more consistently. There was always moments where it was like, damn, that looks cool. But there was also moments where it's like, man, lay off. And I feel like he's doing better at flowing things in and out.
Or like that
Um,
glove, Casca's gloved hand there, you know, that reads like a
yeah.
three-dimensional, you know, object even on a screen right now, you know,
Whereas before it was like, I don't know, kind of
flattening.
like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
value, more like cell shading or something. So that's,
Although, yeah, like I said, the reproduction on the previous volume had for the huge chunk of it was just really hard to tell what you're looking at.
yeah, so it could just be a reproduction issue. And that actually kept me from reading Berserk for a long time, because like I said, I saw volume one in a Barnes and Noble, really responded to the big faux leather cover, picked it up and saw that and was like, nah, I don't know. I mean, it looks kind of cool, but also like not that great. And
Right.
I just dismissed it for a long time. I like this from a writing standpoint. I like this scene here. because Guts starts to learn to manipulate Casca. He's trying to get her to get up and move,
Right.
and he starts saying like, oh, it's because you have your period, you know, like like, I know you're just like a woman, and because you're a woman, like you have this time of month where you can't do stuff, and that kicks off her stubbornness, and she's like, let's go. And then I love, back to the art, how good he is with this expression here of him looking over his shoulder and like, aha, you know, I tricked you. He got like his manipulation through, and he almost takes on a Griffith like
Yeah.
femininity in that smile, which is very rare for Guts. So
That
then
that
you
panel
see,
could be Manji, drawn by Samura.
yeah, that could be as well, for sure. But you see him learning the manipulative aspects of being a charismatic leader. And throughout this volume, Guts starts to realize that he needs to go his own way, as be his own man instead of be a right-hand man to someone else. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a real sophisticated way of showing him learning some of those manipulative tricks from Griffith.
Totally.
Um,
So we have this battle. You know, the Hawks are setting out on this battle, and it has aspects of some of the things we talked about before, with the sort of pile on of figures and the ability to pull back and show masses of figures as like a wave or of undifferentiated objects, as Casca and Griffith are caught up in this struggle.
well, and they've been isolated out from the battle, just the two of them, right?
Right.
And actually, here's the art one that I really like. Within that mass, you talk about fluid dynamics,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that was really illuminating to me as I've continued reading. I continue to see that, but I also noticed just like the mechanics of his fight and the storytelling. I feel like in a lot of manga, and since you're mentioning Blade of the Immortal,
Yeah.
sometimes in Blade of the Immortal, when a fight scene happens, like it's kind of like watching. It's kind of like drawing while watching a TV show. In a lot of manga, for me, like I know fight scene is happening, but the specifics of who's doing what, and it kind of just gets lost for me
Right.
sometimes with artists like Samura. It's all just speed lines, and I know there's swords and stuff flying around. It doesn't really matter though, because that it doesn't matter to the story. Miura is so good at, even within all of that, like the mechanics of the storytelling, and his sense of like, he would have made a good animator too, because
Yeah.
his sense of like, he comes up, lands on his shoulder, shoves the sword down through his throat, like pulls it this way, and then lands him, body
Right.
slams him with it, is all so clearly told. Versus someone else I think of that I get lost is Masamune Shiro. In his
Yeah.
fight scenes, I'm just like, I don't know, there's mechs, they're shooting guns, doesn't really matter, boom, boom, boom. And Miura avoids all of that, I think, with just some astonishingly clear storytelling.
No, it really is quite amazing, and yeah, it reminds me too of I haven't read very much Vagabond, but
Yes.
Vagabond, the manga about a great swordsman, it was made by the guy who had done Slam Dunk, and Slam Dunk, he builds up that situational awareness to like a logical conclusion where 1 5-second interval could take up 15 pages,
Yeah.
uh, and he just knows every single detail of the mechanics, and you can see the guy going up for the dunk, you know what I mean? And so he sort of takes that. um and yeah, Vagabond, I'm wondering if Vagabond would have also been contemporary to this as well.
We're gonna have to read Vagabond. I have them all.
Oh, okay.
I had read them in digital form a long time ago, but I have he never finished it, but I have what's finished. So we'll have to, yeah, that's one I've been wanting to talk about. I started rereading it, and then I put it aside as like, we're gonna have to get to this, because the art in that book is phenomenal. Yeah, I would imagine that with a lot of the cross hatching and stuff, Vagabond's probably contemporary. Look at this, all
Yeah.
that like. That's what I think most artists, if they would have done all those speed lines and stuff, especially without spotted black, that
Right.
this would not make sense. Usually when you don't spot blacks, like the image can devolve into just a mess of lines and grays, and somehow I still make sense of his work, which is
Well, he
Strange.
knows, like you said, he knows what's happening. This is like I mean, not to I'm about to poo on the Lord of the Rings movies. So if this is going to hurt your sensibilities, close your ears for 20 seconds. But the reason that those are such a mess is because they don't, they just do everything with a shaky cam. They didn't have to choreograph anything because all they do is have a bunch of people sloshing around each other in the mud. Uh, if you cut every 2 seconds, there's no possible way you could have any continuity, and so you don't. I say 2 seconds, microseconds. I mean, every 15 frames or whatever they're doing in this Lord of the Rings battle
But that's
scenes.
like all contemporary film, really. Like
Exactly, but
all
then
fight scenes are like
right.
that now.
What I was saying is it's cheap. Like they don't have to choreograph. They don't have
Yeah.
to. Actors don't have to learn anything.
Yeah,
You
it's
know what I
not a
mean?
Jackie Chan movie.
Exactly right. Like, and so it's the same thing. If you're drawing a fight scene and all you're going to do is rely on the energy or perceived energy of a bunch of speed lines, you don't have to choreograph it in your head,
Yeah.
Whereas if you're going to have somebody flip over somebody else and do a very specific kind of action, you actually have to manipulate all that, on mentally in order to get some semblance of it on the page.
Yeah, and
Uh,
like here's a perfect example. Yeah, and it's not just manipulating the forms in your head to make it all work. It's a timing thing, like for impact. So here you have like an opening of a new, the new month's chapter, and you get this whole page just of him with this sword over his back, calm, arrogant. All these people rush at him, and then the next page is just the 1, 2. There's your big Blade of the I mean, he's always had these, but that's that big
yeah.
Blade of the Immortal, like finish him fight scene that
Right.
you're talking about. Mortal
Yeah.
Kombat being another contemporary reference, I guess, in like 94.
Yeah, and obviously both of these things are indebted to other comics, and I'm not saying that he took this from one, or it's a one-to-one
Yeah,
thing. I'm saying these guys were hoeing the same row simultaneously. But I mean, when we finally get to see historical comics like Fist of the North Star, which are coming out in the beautiful Viz editions that are out now, you really
yeah,
get to see like, oh, okay, this is where that comes from, right? But even
yeah,
that, somebody's going to be like, well, really, Fist of the North Star is essentially applying the same principles as this '70s baseball comic. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, but it's
yeah.
true. I mean, I'm not poo pooing that. I
That
think it's true.
bigger, better boss every time structure. Yeah,
Yes, that's right.
yeah.
And it's a successful structure. You know, man, that's some beautiful drawing right there
Yeah.
and
I
designing.
lied. I did make notes about art. I wrote these notes months ago. Everybody, like months, maybe a year ago. This one right here, I just thought was astonishing, and I especially like that he had done black. He had done all black, and then done some painting with white, obviously, to get
Hmm.
some of the tree textures, and then put a tone over that. Like, I don't know that I've seen that kind of. This is almost like a Sam Keith, Kelly Jones
Yeah.
type of technique, like a horror texture from American horror artists. I think, like
Hmm.
I don't know. That feels different to me. And then to
Hmm.
slap the tone over top of it, and then to have that with these big white leaves here
Right. It's
is
awesome.
ooh, that's so
And
good.
yeah, there are several points. We talked about it as solarization before, but there were several points where he totally ignores, lighting fill in a really, sophisticated, attractive kind of way throughout this volume. Usually for moments of distress or, uh, you know,
Ooh,
confusion, surprise. Oh yeah.
the eye stab moment. I mean, that's the thing with this is like, I think that's one of the reasons that when I'm making notes on Berserk, I kind of leave my story notes to what I feel like are the big character moments, because
Right.
uh there's so many minor moments that you could like this guy with this stabbed eye. There's so many things that you could celebrate.
There
Um,
we go. This whole scene has this tree in shadow with them. So the tree is silhouetted, but they're well lit. It's another example of this sort of unnatural lighting. Casca's hair filled in there. Another example of
and just like he's such a master of tone as well. like really the effects that he gets are just gorgeous. Like all this fire here. And at this
Shout
point,
out to the studio dudes who had to actually do it, by the way.
yeah. Well, somebody's a master of tone, but he's a master of planning for the
Yeah.
tone in his compositions,
Absolutely.
at least. And this is pre-computers too, so I
Mhm.
always find these hand-done ones more appealing. There's something about the way they use them when it's on a computer where it's like they get a little too crazy with the possibilities.
Right.
But I do think this scene's also important. This is like Guts is starting to realize that he's been sucked in to this relationship with Griffith. And you start to get a sense in here that maybe his own attraction to Griffith has to do something with his own previous abuse. But then falling in love with Casca, which he obviously is like asserting his actual sexual preference. It's like he had been, I don't know, trained by being molested that's sexuality. And then he's encountering a female and like, oh, I love her, and my attraction to Griffith is something else, and that he's a blazing inferno that is like this all-consuming charismatic character, and he's like, well, my flame ain't here, and he's starting to realize that he needs to set out on his own,
Sword in hand.
yeah, like, and then you get back to that volume 1 like super phallic thing, which at first I just thought was funny, but now I'm seeing it more as this symbolic, taking your own power into your own hand.
Yeah.
Plowing your own hoe.
And we briefly touched on this the last video, but I think it really bears repeating. He's not just using the sexual abuse stuff as a trope. He's not implementing it like you would a trope. He seems to have as a writer, a very clear understanding of how that type of thing impacts somebody.
And putting 3 people who have undergone it together, you don't get your like cliched character that's representing, they're like a flat 2-dimensional representation of abused.
Right.
You have 3 people going through it, and their relationships continue to play out the consequences of that abuse. And that's where I think that kind of writing is so well done and is so interesting to me. And that's what made this 3rd volume all of a sudden, like, the intensity ramped up, and my investment in it ramped up because of the writing.
I can see why people compare this to Cerebus in ways, because you essentially have what is at times a super heady story being told within a genre framework.
Well, there's bigger connections too that you won't see until we read Ray further in, but there's structural similarities. So if you think about volume 1 of Cerebus, it's just the wandering barbarian, and that's kind of Berserk volume 1 is the wandering battle. And then in volume 2 you start to get the politics, right?
Interesting.
And you get Griffith, just like Cerebus, he's starting to work his way up in a political system,
right?
And then well, I won't spoil it, but
Okay.
there's a lot of other similarities to the rise to power, the mystical elements of Cerebus, and the kind of up and down pattern in Cerebus. So there's a lot more than you would think. Like there's even almost the split between the masculine and the feminine in terms of like part 1 and part 2.
Interesting.
In the way that Cerebus has. Anyways, here's another scene I liked, is that they get back to camp, and you get this really like flirty welcome back, and Guts immediately just turns away and like grabs someone else and is like, hey buddy, let's go toss one back. And you see Griffith here in the back.
He's talking about a beer.
Yeah. I'm gonna toss you on your back. But you see Griffith in the back glaring at him, and Casca also looking like, oh, what's going on? And then they get all this, like they're watching him, and you start to see this fracture between Guts and Griffith that I find really compelling. And then back to the amazing, like, holy shit, you just drew the whole Tower of Babel. And
Yeah,
a
so
rhino. These would have made great toys. These animal themed night costumes.
yeah, so they're going to capture this castle, Doldry Castle, and we get a very long sequence involving, some type of tactical array and, chance for Griffith to show off his tactical abilities.
And he's winning influence with the king.
Yeah.
Because he's trying to get his own kingdom, and so now he's moving his way up. And that's where I said that's another similarity to Cerebus, is that political climb,
Right.
that climb for power. I also noticed that he's getting better at faces. Like, he takes different approaches for different characters, almost like different. It's almost like he's pulling from different influences for different
Right.
facial types. And I think for a long time, the facial type that he was using for Guts just doesn't work for me.
Right.
Like, Guts feels like poorly drawn face, and it takes a long time for him to get Guts template
Yeah.
with this level of three-dimensional kind of
Right.
modeling to it. But it's cool to see him like figuring that out on other characters. It's just he hadn't figured out how to put it over certain characters' structural templates yet.
And
which
it's a
is
huge
interesting.
struggle, and it's something anybody who does cartooning but also has realistic abilities is going to struggle with, because you can make a design for a character that doesn't have a real, I don't even know how to call that, the planarity, like the planes of the face don't
Yeah.
really make sense. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota now, and everywhere in all these parks there are peanut statues, and these peanut statues to me look like monstrosities. But it's because you don't really want to see them in the round. Like Schultz's designs work from a few different angles. And you can see different animating teams struggling with that in different ways in some of the animated specials. And Guts is kind of the same way. Like, he's got a very anime design. The flatness of some of the approaches doesn't quite translate in different angles, and so it takes a long time to sort of integrate all those things. Apparently, it takes thousands of pages.
And with the mouth, and
Right.
especially Gut, I've always hated Gut's hair. It's like he doesn't have a full head.
Right.
And then, like, the way it like the front falls forward and this all sticks up, flattens, that's just a flattening part of the design.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. But then you see on other characters, like Guts's face, he can't rotate it back in space.
Right.
But Griffith, he can rotate back at an angle, and it's gorgeous.
Right.
And you get, like, I don't know, just like these characters here, these are such beautiful naturalistic faces.
Right.
So it was kind of distressing to me for a long time that the main character was kind of the more crudely drawn ones. And it takes in way later volumes until I really like Guts' face.
Yeah. Whereas the design itself is, I think, interesting from start one. Actually, that's probably a pretty big Cerebus commonality right there.
Yeah.
I've seen people complain about how when Dave gets better at drawing Cerebus, that he looks more and more like a deformed creature. When you realize that, like, he's got like the una eye and like the mouths on the side.
Oh, the weird little mouth. Yeah. Now, as Miura goes, Guts gets more believable and less grotesque, I think. So it's like the reverse. But here you just see, like, again, this attractiveness of Griffith, his charisma. They're just talking about, like, he is quite the image of a man. We might be fighting alongside the hero of the century, and just everyone's buying into his aura, his charisma. Look at here's a good use of the tone.
Yeah.
The marble, the way they handled marble. How do you even do that? You get two that have like two different fade patterns and overlap them.
You got it. And then selectively etching probably the top layer. I would have to see it up close to tell exactly which layer was done first. But yeah, that's exactly right. And you can do that with an imperfect overlap too.
Do you think that part of what I identify as like the difference between why I like it better when they're using physical tone and when people switch to computer tone is that with computer tone, you're much more likely to just use it as something that you paint in. Whereas with this, you have a sheet and you're kind of manipulating the
Yeah,
multiple sheets relative to each other.
I do. I actually asked Gerhard about this when I interviewed him back in. God, I'm old.
A while
12,
back.
12 years ago.
Wow.
And this particular effect that he got, which is very similar to this, on a deck chair in one of the volumes of Going Home.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Had you read any manga?" And he said, "No." And he's like, "If you have tone, and you pop a sheet on top of the other, you immediately see the effect. So why not exploit it?"
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's like it's the difference between something being a natural outcropping of a physical phenomenon versus just making a sort of mimicry of an existing thing.
Yeah. And it just, I think because like when you're working digitally, you're not taking so much time to like align how the dots interact and stuff.
Right.
Like it's the computer's gonna snap it to a grid if you're working with the brush. So I've been thinking about like the better way to do it digitally, and I think this is the way you do it,
I
is
do.
you create like a big like,
Yep.
okay, I'm gonna basically have like a digital sheet
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to copy and paste that on top and then erase out. And then I
Right.
could put another digital sheet on top and scooch it around and rotate it instead of
Yeah.
relying on clone stamps or brushes or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's how I do it, and it's because the subtractive makes more sense to me mentally because that's what I'd done. I mean, I might have told this story before on somebody who's watched every single video we've done.
Yeah.
I bought hundreds of sheets of tone at a closeout sale that
Mm.
my local store had in like 1996 or something, 1997. And I just went down there and saw that all of a sudden these screen tones were selling for 40 cents a sheet. And I bought everything that they had, and I used that for years and years and years. And yeah, so if you've already worked subtractively like that, the sort of mentally how you think about it, I think it makes more sense.
Well, and there's a lot of the effects that they get come from the reductive, like
Right.
the way they'll scratch out just like a little bit of the edge of something to create a glow or whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
don't see that working as well if you were like had a pen and just noodling in and cross
Right.
hatching and stuff. You could get something similar, but I think that's part of it is there's just a vocabulary that we're used to that
Right.
changes when it goes digital, and they're trying to keep the vocabulary to some extent, but it just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work the same.
Yeah, so the soft edge like that, mechanically, you would have done that with a like a sand eraser or something that is
Yeah.
rough but not so rough it'll rip the tone, and you can
Yeah.
kind of you know eat away at the edge.
Anyways, back to the story. The
These
very
rhino
creepy,
nights.
the very creepy, gross rich guy who had a sexual encounter with Griffith earlier in the story now is in the castle, and he's saying that one night, even now I can't forget, he is a fine wine worth the value of his weight in gold, an intoxicating phantom that burns of that night still the burns of that night still do not heal. I swear I will have you once more, lover. And Griffith's outside just like, I'm about to tear down your castle.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
revenge, bitch.
But as is every other story point so far, this is going to fall into Griffith's favor because this guy has told them that they must capture the leader of the band of knights or band of
Not
hawks. They
not
must
kill him.
not kill him.
Yeah.
And so every strategic mistake that this other team is going to make comes out of that initial weakness.
And here you get, I was seeing if we could get a better picture of it, but you get his helmet that you were referencing
Yeah.
from that film. And then more enviable fight mechanics
Yeah.
and just enviably composed action scenes. with astonishing use of like foreshore. Like, look at that.
Yeah.
His sense of perspective and foreshortening is like the fact that this is the horizon and he's got everything tucked up underneath there, and someone
Got
else
some
that deals with scale very well.
got some Dutch tilt in there too.
Yeah, just barely.
Just enough.
Yeah, to accentuate how big the figure is.
Right.
And I really like this. There's this battle happening here, and he just montages the big heads over top of it, so you get like their emotional state and the whole scene. You know, he's not cheaping out on. He's not doing the Hollywood cheap out, right? Like in
Right.
the Hollywood cheap out, they would just show them ride by each other with those faces and like a sword hit or something. But
Right.
here's like, nah, we'll give you the whole scene and the emotional state. And
I
look at
can't.
how three-dimensional the armor's starting to
Yeah.
look.
I have to tell you, when I see a crowd scene like this, I just can't imagine. I mean, obviously, you know, please keep in mind, dear listener, when I compare myself to somebody like this, it's not because I think I'm fit to clean the pens of Miura.
Or as Dave would put it, we're not fit to clean their jock straps, to launder
Right.
their jock straps.
Exactly. Yeah. I am not. The comparison is solely for my own edification, but I can't imagine, you know, getting a script from somebody that says, you know, a crowd of horseback soldiers ride up to each other while someone is decapitating someone in the foreground, and actually drawing the soldiers. You know what I mean? I mean,
Oh, yeah. And like, this is one of those things where, because he's writing for himself,
right.
he could write around the difficult stuff.
Yes.
But I mean, he seems to enjoy these things the most.
Right.
And
Well, because
so
otherwise he wouldn't write it for himself for 80 pages or whatever. I mean, this is going to be a huge battle. We're just at the start of it, you know.
or he's just so committed to the story and he knows he can do it that he does it anyways. He's like, okay, this is gonna suck, but I mean, he keeps coming back to these scenes, and he never, you know, I've got 12 volumes of it now, I think, and he never cuts a corner on any of it. I mean, I know he's got a studio, but there no one's ever cutting corners in this book.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know the practices of the studio. So, for instance, like, does he rough in that entire crowd, and then he does the rendering on 2 of the figures, and then somebody else takes it over? I mean,
it's a good question, because by the way, I don't know if you know, but they've now started putting out new chapters after his death.
I have heard that. Yeah,
His
childhood rival, right?
no, like a good friend who apparently was someone that he would go to frequently while he was working out the story. So someone who had many conversations with him about where it was all going, and I guess helped him formulate that, is now like directing the studio. And so it's pretty obvious, because I've looked at some of those newer chapters, that he definitely had trained people to draw similar to him and to compose similar to him and stuff. It's not exactly his touch, but it's very close. And so that confuses the who did what a little bit more, I think, because you very well could, it looks like you very well could have had a studio guy do all of this and have it be fairly consistent.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about. Like, if I was going to do this, like I said, once again, I'm just thinking practically.
Yeah.
And I had, you know, 3 people or 4 people, I might be tempted to do the rough myself, have somebody else do the pencils, and then do a certain amount of the inking to ensure consistency.
Yeah.
And then have somebody else go back in and finish the inking. So in other words, like, it might be like back and forth several different times, you know?
And that may explain some of the differences in cross hatching. It's like, well, that guy really knows how to get a nice gradient out of the cross hatching, so I'm going to trust him to go shine up all the armor.
Right.
Versus earlier where he was doing it, he didn't have as much facility, or his style was a little too rigid or something. That could be as well. And I mean, that's in line with how old masters did it. Like
Uh-huh.
Peter Paul Rubens had his like bird guy, right?
Right.
And so you need a bird, you call in the bird guy, and then you bring over the other guy for like the metal. And but they've all been trained in like Rubens techniques, so it has some kind of similarity throughout, some kind of
Right. Which
consistency.
which is why you can see those Mona Lisa, quote unquote copies that look like absolute garbage taken as a whole, but then you look at the hands and they're perfectly modeled on all the places where someone
Yeah,
might instruct their pupils.
yeah, yeah.
And it's like, oh, right. I don't own a Leonardo. I don't even own a copy of Leonardo. I own 1/20th of a Leonardo.
Yeah, his hand did the fingernails or something.
Exactly. He came in to instruct somebody on their terrible copy,
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah. So anyway, which is all this is largely unknowable as far as I know. His studio process hasn't been like publicly documented. Um, but that's sort of how I would approach it if I was
yeah,
forced to do such a thing.
yeah. And I would love to have that resource because I could get so much more done. as a I think creative director would be the most fulfilling role, as long as you get to do some drawing yourself. So
Right.
having a studio like that seems like it would be awesome. Anyways, I love that this creepy pederast has this sculpture. This is like all of a sudden this real world, like historical thing in there, which is a little bit strange to me, that you've got Pan seducing this innocent, and it's very Greco-Roman within this fantasy world. But it's also like, if anyone's going to have that statue, it would be this dude.
Well, and it's a very French British fantasy world. So
Yeah.
having something that would have been abhorrent to you know yeah the cross cultural aspect of it is I always sort of have that in the back of my head, like this is a hybrid work.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that's kind of what makes it cool. It's kind of like Game of Thrones in that there's all these different cultures within the land, and he'll switch around the cultural reference, which is cool. I always like him when he uses the brush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
He's
he's got
so good with it.
tremendous energy.
And it hurts that he doesn't do that all the time, but the fact that he reserves it for special moments like that.
Oh man.
And like, look, he's using like the poor man's airbrush toothbrush
Uh-huh.
technique. I don't think he does this anywhere else. He's
Yep.
just trying it for this page. Decides he
It's
doesn't like
amazing.
it, maybe, but it looks great. This is another one of your fluid dynamics.
Yeah, no, it sure is. That's exactly the type of thing I was talking about before. Those of you guys who haven't memorized all of our videos, uh, you know, if you ever watch a crowd, and this is a demonstrable phenomenon, crowds move like fluid. In other words, if you map a crowd moving through a street of a city, and you can map their movements, and basically they move exactly like fluid would be moving through something of a similar shape on a fluid scale.
If the fluid went through the same path.
Exactly.
Interesting.
On a
And
different scale, and you
this,
can see that in his group compositions, that he is aware of that as a tendency. You have, it's not just like a clump of figures here and a clump of figures there. There's a mass there's a mass shape and a mass behavior, and he tries it out at different scales and with different levels of rendering and stuff, and it's always super impressive and very interesting. And it's amazing to compare it to you know historical paintings and drawings of similar kinds of things, and to see the same kind of observation. It's the
I
sort of
don't know that
on
I've
the
ever
hill
seen
battle.
I don't know that I've ever seen anyone compose battle scenes so well, though. Like, even
Yeah,
art historically, I can think of some big long shot scenes and stuff, but ones where he's really getting the close to the camera and then
right.
depth in the way that he does. Something else in terms of like you're talking about level of finish on the rendering. It's as I'm looking at this now, post dealing with the AI. Um, as you get back to the back, I'm like, okay, he just outdid Barry Windsor Smith, the pile of bodies with Conan on top. He
Right.
just outdid that a lot. And I leaned in to see, like, is this guts back here standing on the pile? And it kind of is, but it's kind of also just like a mushy little suggestion
Right.
that that doesn't really even resolve into a sensible figure, kind of like what the AI would do.
Right.
This has that, like in the back, he's confident enough at drawing that he can just leave a blobby little suggestion and let you figure it out. And
Mhm.
that's something I've learned from the AI is as long as you get in the territory, people will
Right.
kind of understand what it is, and that he has figured that out and employed it is impressive. Fucking shark suit.
Yeah, so this is why I always reference Battle Angel Alita. This design here, these guys are hoeing similar territory. I love it. I'm not complaining. No complaints here. I see a kind of commonality to it. We're like, well, okay, well, we've got to have him fight somebody. Well, this guy's gonna have a giant pig snout on his waist that talks to him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's what I was saying. These would have been awesome toys. Like you've got the Rhino Warrior and the Shark Warrior. And I don't know. They just, it seems like something that could be licensed to make all kinds of cool stuff and make a boatload of money.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems necessary for the story, but he also seems, I mean, he just likes designing cool characters too, but it
Yeah.
also seems like you've pointed out in previous ones, he's like setting the animators up to succeed by
Mm-hmm.
working in a way that seems animatic. It seems like he's setting up a toy line to succeed as well.
There's that solarization effect is happening right there. That guts on the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Um, so notice that where you would expect there to be the darkest shadows are instead like a 30% gray.
And I love that effect. And
Yeah.
he kills it. I mean, here's another, I think this is another
Mm-hmm.
example of it. Um, that's a trick that I'm very familiar with from manga. And I'm also familiar with, like, that came into, I think Todd McFarlane was one of the first
Mm.
American artists I can think of that really used that a lot. He would do that with color, should be black, but he'd like drop in a dark blue or something. You know, he'd leave it open and the colors would drop in a dark blue. So it's an effect I've always liked, but I think Miura does it exceptionally well. Here's another Frank Miller level fight mechanics.
Right.
Amazing stuff. Um, let's see what I wrote here. It was some story manipulation. I don't know. I just wrote tight ass, good mouth.
Mysterious are the ways of Carson's notes.
Yeah. It was just one night, but oh, how I've yearned for that again. Won't you grant the wish of the one you shared it with? So I was just assuming
Yeah.
Griffith must have had a tight ass and a good mouth. But he's using the guy, like he's using that one night that they had, and he's using it, you know, to manipulate him,
Right.
and then kill
Not only
him.
did he get the money for it and he got the influence for it, but he also was able to take the castle because of it. And so, yeah, we have talked before about Griffin's carrying this Behelit thing, this like many faced,
Yeah.
spirit thing that we don't really know anything about yet, around with him, supposedly to protect him from harm. And, I think that it's possible that the story is intending to imply that he is living a charmed life because of that. But of course, as we know from the real world, somebody who acts like Griffith also, those characteristics are useful to you until they're not.
Yeah, I mean they can get you far in life, and I think that's that. Besides the joke of like tight ass, good mouth or
Right.
whatever, I wrote that he's a user, and this really shows it. That it's not just that he's charmed; he's charmed to be able to get away with what he's doing, but he's very intentional. Like this guy's saying, "You don't resent me, do you?" And he's not. I don't resent you, Excellency. And I think this dialogue is just some of his dialogue can be so good sometimes.
I simply have no emotional interest in you at all.
Yeah, resentment, endearment, nothing. I just took the liberty of using you when the opportunity appeared. You were like a stone lying by the side of the path I walk, that and nothing more. And then he kills him and he says, although having your loose tongue spread petty rumors would prove a slight inconvenience. So it's like we don't want anyone to know that I'll
Right.
suck a dick to get, and
Right.
like, but that just uttered utter what's the word that I'm looking for? His just absolute disinterest in the guy.
That
Is
facial
so
expression too. That
so cold.
this seems to be Griffith's natural state. Uh, is the implication that this is the true Griffith?
Yeah, he's actually completely emotionless, but Miura is so good at drawing him projecting emotion,
Right.
and then you learn like all of that projection isn't entirely fake. Like any of this kind of charming thing he's doing is affected. And it's
Go back one more page. There's the bottom Griffith. No, Griffith riding forward. There,
yeah.
bottom in the left-hand corner there. A very minor version of something that was very, very common in Gustave Doré
Mm, yeah.
engravings.
Like this
white on
white
gray.
area back here.
Mm-hmm. And there's a few other instances of that. That's a pretty much direct from some of the Inferno plates.
And
That technique.
that's an effect you wouldn't get unless you were doing what we were talking about with laying down a tone and then scratching out.
Right.
And it works so good.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that Casca face too. That's
Yeah,
so
it's fantastic.
three-dimensional. It feels almost referenced compared to his other stuff. He's getting way better at turning around faces.
Yeah, see, like Guts right there. Despite the hairline, he's got at least a little bit of a creep up on the hairline, but his eyes are sitting slightly more on a curve on that face.
He does draw Guts' eyes like straight. That's part of the problem. He doesn't curve them to like this eye should actually be heading back up a little bit to capture the roundness of a head. Yeah.
But it's closer. Yeah, it's interesting.
And with all of this interest in what I believed was a homoerotic undercurrents between Griffith and Guts, there's been many points where they've kind of acknowledged it explicitly, but right here they're all at this big party and Guts is gonna go do something else, and they're all celebrating the Band of the Hawks winning, and this guy says, well, I'm the one who taught him the sword, besides he's a fag anyways. So like the characters within the group kind of assume that Guts and Griffith have this love interest as well, and they see them as homosexual characters, I think.
Right, presumably because of the same mechanics that caused Casca to be dynamics. I mean, that caused Casca to be jealous in the first place is that Griffith, or that Guts shows up and Griffith acts obsequiously towards him or solicitous of his affections or attentions.
Yeah, he really seems to like it, and I think it comes down to not necessarily homoerotic in the end, but that these are, well, Griffith is obviously like an apex predator, right? And I think Guts has the making of the other apex predator, and an apex predator, and well, we'll get to it because they talk about it more, but they both are going to want a equal, right? Like you're not going to be able to respect someone unless they're equal, but anyone who is equal is also then a threat, someone to combat. And I find that such a compelling dynamic between them, and the fact that Guts is realizing that he also is a charismatic apex predator and he has to strike out on his own is interesting.
I also want to throw out I don't intend my discussion of Guts's design to be a shot on the artwork. I think this is a natural consequence of taking a cartoony design and placing it into a framework that has realistic looking drawing. It's just it's the natural state of cartooning in that context, and it is only resolvable to the taste of the artists and over a period of time,
Yeah, and he's actually, like, here you see he can curve the eyes, and he's starting to allow himself to let Guts have almost like chibi like expressions, which for me is a little strange that he's introduced that at first, it's hard for me to deal with because it goes back to like his little fairy character,
Right.
those more cartoony characters, and Guts is such this dark, serious character throughout. To see a drawing like this of Guts, like with his tongue sticking out and his teeth grabbing and that
Right.
those more exaggerated expressions, it's strange to me, but that's actually where I think he starts doing a better job of drawing Guts.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah.
Is when he lets the face get more plastic and less serious. So I like that, and I like this little scene where she's dressed up all pretty, and he's like, I didn't think you were into that kind of stuff, and then she elbows him, and it starts to show their flirtation growing, and she starts to be more and more suspicious of Griffith, and they go outside, and this scene I think is one of the most important scenes in the book. They're out there kind of talking about their plans for the future, and is this the scene? Maybe not. They're like down at the bottom of the steps and they hear Griffith talking. Maybe that's a little bit later. But it's like the turning point in the whole book.
Yeah. There's the solarization again.
Yeah, that's a great use of it, right? And here he is being a manipulative fuck again. And you see, like, this is the true Griffith, right?
Right.
Like, he's this evil thing. Here you see it too. When a man is faced with something he truly fears, he cannot ignore it. He has two options. He can subordinate and fall under its wing, or can strike and erase out the fear. And he's going to subordinate everything. And then here he's committing to, I can't remain buried in his dream. So Guts is finding his own kind of individuality. He can't just follow the pack anymore. All my notes. I'm sorry, Sean. I know this is so much.
Griffith's horse mask. I just Horsehawk.
Horsehawk, yeah. But here, yeah, this is the expression of, I think the core of the story is he didn't have anything. He was trying to take hold of everything. Something about him made you think it could happen. Like he's just saying he had that charisma that you believed in his dream. But in order for him to aim so high, he has to hone himself to the very limit. That's why there's no room at his side for the weak. And there's always, even from the very beginning, when you first meet Griffin, he's at the top of the stairs and Guts is at the bottom, and Griffith is up there with all the rest of those, like,
Right.
those Hellraiser type of bad guys. He's always down at the bottom of the steps.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to achieve to that. Like there's no room at his side for someone that weak. And at this point, Guts is now being like, okay, I've got to, I don't know if he's trying to earn his love or if he sees that he's a bad guy and he's trying to stop him, but it's very clear that, but strangely, the more clear that becomes, the more dazzling he is in my eyes. And I've had enough of looking up at him from inside his dream. I want to stand beside him by attaining something of my own. He's the only one I can't stand to have looking down on me. And that's a hell of a, like, to me, that's the motivation for the rest of whatever the story turns out to be.
Mm-hmm.
Is that and then Griffith's like anger at this person leaving him.
Right.
And they're talking about Casca, that the one who has Casca's eye is Griffith. That's why right now I'm no good for her like this. And I think he feels like there's a bit like Casca's kind of just something that Guts has to attain to prove that he can get it and Griffith can't. There's a bit of that in there, which is gross. Also, better at the face.
Fantastic.
Speaking of face and all the cross hatching.
Well, as soon as you go into a 3/4 view like that, I mean, it's you have to give it a certain amount of dimensionality to it, you know.
And that big, you better do it right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's an excellent semi-profile back there too.
Who knows where I was at? Look at that dolphin. Creepy dolphin.
It's just all of the sort of art things. I mean, these are the things that like I are always on my mind because I tend to draw in a fairly cartoony style, um, and so it's just interesting.
And then here we have like Guts is like, okay, I'm gonna leave the band of the Hawks. I'm taking off on my own. And Griffith straight up says, I thought I told you that you belong to me.
Right.
I won you with this. So again, the phallic, your fight and your death, I hold both. If you want to leave my grasp, then it will be the same as that time. Rest yourself away by the sword. Like, you're gonna have to fight for it, buddy. As when they first met. And then here it's just, I won't have it. I won't let you. Like, he feels so much ownership over Guts, but obviously it's like so much attraction to him as well. Like, he just cannot tolerate, like, if I can't have him, then
He's still got on his French party clothes.
Yeah, he does. But his like absolute spite and anger, and like the way I think this is where Griffith becomes a real bad guy, because this is the point at which he becomes willing to sell out. Like, all, I mean, he's already sold out so much, but at this point he's just like fully willing to go evil.
And it turns out that his magic charm might have been Guts all along, because he's about to make some very, very bad decisions because Guts has left.
Yeah. And then right here, you're talking about Samura.
Yeah.
This is done in pencil right here. This last page is all pencil. Even the hatching and stuff is pencil. And that's like the only place I can see that. And this is like that fracture point where Guts has left the band. Casca's kind of left hanging in the wind. And he switches to pencil just to give it that extra sense of fragility, which I think is great. And then the dialogue here, it's all right. It's like stumbling on a rock on the roadside. It's petty, a small thing. The place you want to go is more distant, further off. So it's all right. You'll stand up and you'll start walking soon.
Notice
So
the
it's just
rock,
like this.
the rock on the wayside back is a metaphor, and Guts' mouth this time instead of Griffith's.
Yeah. Well, and Griffith is like kind of the rock that he supposedly stumbled on. And then you get this shot of Griffith like being all emaciated and kind of up in his own self. But yeah, then he breaks from that. He has like a fever break from that and allows himself to go have a night with the princess, which is entirely political, right? It's like, well, if I can score the princess, then I'm now higher in a place of power. But she legitimately is as in love with him as anyone else.
Right.
And he's doing this, I think, entirely out of spite and frustration. And then here he's being tortured for it, right? Like he slept with the king's daughter and he's being tortured, and then he's still manipulating, and he starts convincing the king that, like, well, you're just mad because you wanted to have sex with your own daughter. And he sees that fracture in the king and picks at it,
right,
and is able to get a reaction out of him. And then has basically broken his mind because the guy goes and tries to assault his own daughter. Right. So even in his completely diminished state, his manipulative abilities are like wildly impressive and impactful. And we get a ton more of your fluid dynamics here.
Yeah. And so Guts comes across this. What would you even call him? I mean, he's intended to be like, he's like a Orientalist fighter trope,
almost like a genie ninja.
Yeah.
I guess would be the best way to put
Mhm.
it. They do this, these people do have like some kind of genie like powers, but yeah, it's definitely like a East Indian or Middle Eastern
Mhm.
kind of warrior figure. And he's reuniting with Casca after
Right.
a while. And you
Yeah.
see, actually, I think part of what allows him to draw his face better is he's older now and he's not trying to show
Right.
the youthfulness. And I think
Yeah.
that helps him give it more form and structure.
I had forgotten about that. That there was a sort of dip when we got into the childlike, you know, and then the youth aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and
But
there's
yeah.
a
So
time jump here implied that Guts has been gone for a while.
yeah.
And now it's like, oh, he's back. Like, wow, Captain Guts is back. Wow. And he looks older and more serious. And I feel like he's better able to draw him in that moment.
So yeah, the band of hawks has basically totally been destroyed. They wander around, um,
Disbanded.
right? And so Guts fights this guy who he had previously uh, met, essentially like in a street fight, like a exhibition fight, and totally defeated. But now this guy is like willing to use all of his like pseudo magical powers.
Yeah, he's fighting with like, I don't know, strips of fabric or something.
Mm-hmm. And his costume and these like curved blades that he can throw like a boomerang.
And so that's where it's like that's the ebb and flow of Berserk for me, is it goes into that stuff and then I'm just like, wow, cool art, blah 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 blah.
Right.
But all of that stuff to me falls to the wayside a little bit. It's just like to get you to the next kind of thing. Like you have to have some cool action stuff to keep people involved.
Yeah, and I could imagine somebody reading the reverse of that and reading it solely for the action sequences and barely tolerating the drama or the courtroom. I mean, not courtroom, the social stuff.
I feel like that's probably most people that read it.
Interesting.
Just based on what I've heard, like partially based on the reaction to my insistence in the first two videos on this homoerotic nature of it. A lot of people seem to be like, dude, you're just seeing, like, you're just reading that into there, and it's like, have you not been reading all of these? Like, to me, that implies that you just haven't been reading any of it, because it's, I don't know how that cannot be part of the story. Look at
Right.
that use of tone there, and the spray technique with the
Hmm.
white. But
Yeah. So,
anyways, go ahead.
so he and Casca are reunited, and they're going to be reunited or united in new ways as well. Uh,
And she's just saying like that Griffith's no good without you. And like I think she's implying that he's gone dark, right? Like things have fallen apart without you. Yeah, he needed you. And I don't know why I didn't have it tagged, but there's a scene in here where Casca and Guts they're at this big party, and they're at the bottom of these stairs, and they're listening to Griffith talk to somebody about his plans,
right.
and Guts is kind of standing at the bottom of the stairs. I thought that was in this one. Guts is kind of standing at the bottom of the stairs listening to Griffith talk about being this manipulative guy. He's doing some kind of political thing, conversation with someone else, and you see Guts kind of glom on to the darkness of him. I don't know why I didn't tag that, but anyways, there's always this kind of staircase thing going on, which I found to be an interesting repetition of the theme, the idea of the social climber represented by the staircase.
Hmm. And then they are going to have sex for the first time, and right before they actually do it, essentially Guts starts having horrible flashbacks to the beginning of the Golden Age arc, where he
Yeah, where
was sold
he's been
out.
molested. Yeah.
Yeah, not
And
only
so
by
that's and
oh
just the power of the artwork here, where he's
yeah.
like seeing her and projecting his own face into the same position, is pretty intense.
Yeah, it really is, and it's another excellent use of comics as comics, having those two images together like that and back to back like that. And these are the scenes that, give the work the most kind of gravitas. But also the ones that like it seems like it would be hard to draw it, and it seems like it would be hard to like persuade I don't know, a publisher to publish it. Um, there's such a reluctance today. We've talked before about how things from a different country may be kind of get a pass with this sort of attitude,
Yeah.
but there's a reluctance today to engage in something or depict something that you as author don't approve of,
Yeah.
um, because you can get castigated for it. And this is a scene that's very powerful that um, it's hard to imagine that somebody would, you know, willingly
It,
subject themselves to potential blowback of it.
it's also astonishing that Dark Horse hasn't put a like trigger warning in the front. I feel like so many comics that I pick up now that have anything in them, like there's a couple that I picked up that have like trigger warning, this deals with rape or something, and the rape is like implied off camera. And it's like, really, we put a trigger warning in for like an off camera assault? It just, the fact that that topic is even covered is too stressful to people. But then this is like wildly popular with the kids, and it has some of the most overt, intense, rape and just crazy like sex with monsters and
Yeah.
it's all these things that you would think would get them all worked up. No one's complaining about this. This is like the most popular thing out there right now. I mean, these things, these hardcovers are selling for $50 a piece,
I'm
and
not
any
suggesting that
books.
people I'm not suggesting people should complain about this, by the way. I'm just
No,
saying, like,
no, me
yeah,
neither. I think
yeah,
this is an amazing piece of literature, fiction, and it's dealing with something intense, and that's what we need to be dealing with in our fiction.
right.
But I find it interesting that these are $50 a piece, and it's one of the best-selling manga books right now.
Yeah.
You go into any bookstore and there's stacks of these things everywhere, so they're selling, and the kids are snapping it up with no problem.
Yeah.
But even that the fact that his sexuality has been tainted from the very beginning to have a violent component to it, and that he's reacting to that, like, no, I'm not going to engage in that. Like, that's one of those, well observed, like, his whole struggle with, like, I don't even know, like, he doesn't even know how to deal with this. And then he breaks down and starts dealing with, I couldn't do a damn thing. I couldn't resist, not as a child. Like, he has a real emotional reaction. It's not glossed over.
Right. Yeah, and it seems genuine, like you said, like, well observed, not tropey in the least.
Yeah, and shows guts, as he is loosening up. He is having those comedic moments, right? He does have the chibi face moments, and then here he's like crying. I've killed so many people, more than I can count. Like, why am I doing this? And this self-doubt. And then here they're kind of connecting, like they've both been rejected by that charismatic figure now.
Right.
So they're gonna take care of each other and lick each other's wounds a little bit.
I'd like to say that I more than anything appreciate the commitment to not only having this scene, but having this scene after what's essentially like a 30-page sex scene leading up to it. Like, I mean, it's not just that they have this, it's that this caps off like what you think is going to be like a fan servicey kind of like, let's see what Casca looks like underneath that dress kind of thing. And the cap off is that they're both totally traumatized by the things that have happened to them, and having this like experience together in a glen while he remembers what it was like to be a little kid. I mean, it just kills me.
Yeah, it's like it gives you that fan service, shipping the characters, putting them in a relationship that everyone's been rooting for, but undermines it with like, yeah, but it ain't pleasant. And so that stuff I think that is all throughout this volume. That kind of stuff. We didn't even talk about Nosferatu Zod, who's so important. There's just so much in here you can't talk about it all. But those are the things. Those moments, those relationship moments, are the things that really sucked me in this volume and made me not able to wait to move on to reading the next one.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that was some intense stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what's great, right?
It is. So I'm guessing that the next volume immediately turns into a domestic drama with Guts and Casca having a 4-year-old precocious little girl who wants to, turn on the air conditioner until she finds out that it's causing global warming, right?
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, because it follows the Cerebus structure. So we got to get our Jaka story now, right?
Right. So what you're telling me is that the first 1,500 pages of Guts are actually a prequel to Yotsuba, right?
Yeah, to
Or
Yotsuba.
Yotsuba.
Actually, no, we have to have an ascension first, because that's also part of
Okay.
the Cerebus structure. So volume 4 is the ascension. In a very, very real and very volume 4 like takes all the momentum of volume 3, the emotional momentum, and then just puts it on this crash course
Really?
towards an ascension in the kind of the same way that Cerebus ascends.
All right. Well, I'm excited to find out what it's like. I'm gonna have to hop the line of my book reservation if we're gonna get to volume 4.
Yeah, but
At the library.
Sean is implying that we're going to go take a look at another completely opposite manga project.
Yeah, which I could use a little break. So much eyeball popping. I have an eyeball popping threshold. I think that I
Yeah.
might have maxed out the other day.
So after all the grim and gritty, you need your light and brighty.
Something like that. Yeah. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm hoping that people will, without ruining my reading experience, if you guys can let us know your comparisons for different types of stories. What to you Berserk, both on a macro and micro level, resembles? I'd be very curious to hear, because to me, I'm still sort of going with the Fist of the North Star, um, villain escalation as a sort of exterior framework fitted in with a social climber and 3-pronged relationship drama.
Yeah, it's
As like
got that
slices.
like shojo relationship kind of things that he's drawing from.
Mm-hmm.
I think I read like the big sparkly heads and
Mm-hmm.
the love triangle and all of that stuffed into this. Yeah, kind of Fist of the North Star structure. But I think unlike Fist of the North Star, it's also got like the main villain,
Mm.
and it's more of a story about how he became the villain. I don't know. I feel like you get the end, and then the whole story is like an explanation for how you get to that point, which is
This is
an
definitely
interesting.
the chunk that has the most interesting pacing to me so far, and the most purposeful pacing, let's say.
Yeah.
I sometimes felt a little bit unmoored in some of the other sections. I think this is the one that is sort of hitting the zone for me in terms of understanding what I'm gonna perhaps expect in terms of density of material and stuff.
Yeah, I think this is peak stuff. But anyways, it is very grim and gritty. So thanks for joining us on this, and please join us as we dip into Yotsuba, and make
Yeah,
sure you get Centralia. Make sure you get the Exile. Make sure that you go get I gotta grab my copies. If you haven't, The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. What else do we got? Look at this book that you can't get a hold of anymore. You don't know, Jack.
I've still got 12 copies on the Living the Line store.
Oh, Sean has 12 copies. This is a prequel to Strange Death of Alex Raymond that hardly anyone knows about. That's by myself and Dave Sim, and some art from this guy named Sean Robinson
Oh,
over here.
look at that!
And
It's me
I
copying
was
oil paintings with little tiny black lines.
yeah. which is I also do that. It's not recommended. I drove myself crazy. I was scrambling for copies of Abolition of Man, but apparently I don't have them within arm's reach. But also check out the Abolition of Man.
Yeah, a lot of stuff coming out. I know, but really, this is the time. So I hope that you guys are enjoying the things. I've really enjoyed the messages that I've gotten. People who are still reading Strange Death, people who are reading Abolition of Man. I've got some reviews of Strange Death that really came out recently that I thought were really excellent. One on the Comics Journal that is a very long essay that I think gets a lot of the key concerns of the book, the meta-narrative concerns of the book, and also a very interesting review that just came out from Andrew Rillstone, who is a writer from the UK who has a lot of interesting things to say as well. Really enjoyed reading both of those and enjoy hearing people's engagement with the book. Special shout out to cartoonist Mike, whose copy was stolen out of his car recently. No. So special shout out to the thief for having good taste.
I can't believe, was that all that was stolen?
I haven't followed up with him, but I need to follow up, and I might write him a message now and tell him I'll replace his copy.
We'll have to send Mike a copy.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you all have a great one.
Take it.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.